also knew that there would be nothing I could say in return. And fucking yet, I wanted nothing more than to defeat her. Chain smoke unfiltered Pall Malls in her bedroom. And that made me cry. Coming up, my weight was among the favorite topics of discussion in my family. And because I was the largest of the female cousins, mine was the body subjected to the most weight-based scrutiny. In early elementary school, I was a totally normal weight, maybe even thin. There are pictures of me at around 7 or 8 where I look pretty skinny. So the weight gain didn't really start until 5th or 6th grade. And even then, I was barely overweight. I mean, looking back, hindsight is always like that. But yeah, I just looked like a regular kid. But as middle school rolled into high school, I got bigger, and this was a real issue. Not an issue for me, as I was just a kid, but it would quickly become an issue for me because it was an issue for the women in my family, notably my mother and grandmother, the matriarchs of the family who set the tone for how a person was treated, received, and perceived within our family's ecosystem. In her 2017 memoir titled Hunger, Roxane Gay recounts that as she began to increase in size as a teenager, her weight became what she describes as a, quote, family problem. And I never contextualized my experience in this way, but I found that her description, family problem, was an apt description of what it was like to grow up as a fat child and teen in my family, because they were highly critical of weight, which was weird because they weren't terribly critical in most other aspects, but the weight was like one of the big things. I have a grainy memory of my mom comparing me to my sister, the outcome of that conversation being that she was critical of me and not her being my sister, because she wasn't the one with a weight problem. So that conversation it really stands out in my memory, although I cannot remember exactly how it went, but at the end she was just like, well, she's not the one with the weight problem, being the reason why she was always on me. And I was young. I mean, I was probably 9, 10 when this, maybe even younger when this conversation happened. So it was really a turning point as far as the way that I would be scrutinized based on my weight in my family, in my own family. And I want to note here that my sister wasn't thin. Certainly, we were both overweight. However, she was smaller than me, and she kind of had a more muscular build, and I had a softer and rounder one. Therefore, this saved her much of the scrutiny that dogged me for most of my life. I share this experience, or this story, because it's one of my earliest experiences of being singled out in my family due to my weight. And I know that a lot of fat children, fat teens have this experience as far as their families being kind of their first bullies. The call is usually coming from inside the house. And for me, it was the first kind of bubbling up of the fat phobic sludge in which I would marinate until adulthood. Because I was a mildly fat child who became a very fat teenager, all of my early years were marked by what we now call fat phobia. But back then it was just rude, unnecessary, mean commentary about my weight. And the charge was led by my grandmother. A cantankerous, acerbic battle axe of an old woman, okay? She was typically the one with the most to say, the most criticism about me being fat. For context, this was a woman who, according to our family lore, socked a white man in the face who demanded that she get to the back of the bus where you belong in the 60s. This was also a woman who would chain smoke unfiltered Pall Malls in her bedroom, with my grandfather trying to sleep beside her while petting her black cat Midnight, definitely her familiar, and gossiping on the phone to her church friends. I was always jealous of those people whose grandmas baked cookies and shit, cause mine baked suffering. I won't go so far as to say that she outright bullied me, because I want to say even then I knew that it was coming from a place of concern, but I actually don't know what I was thinking. Like, I cannot speak to my mindset back then, but in hindsight, I have to say, she didn't bully me, and she wasn't, she never like called me names or anything, or that she was verbally abusive, but she definitely made my weight an issue. We spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and so it was a constant, or it felt constant, running commentary about me being fat. And because we spent a lot of time with her, that meant a lot of time for me being encouraged to lose weight through nagging and criticism. That's right, the proven vehicle through which generations of fat people have lost weight and kept it off. Shame! Though my grandmother was my most ardent detractor when it came to my weight, inexplicably she was also my greatest enabler, because she was once fat herself. That's right. By the time I burst onto the scene in the late 80s and came to sentience and awareness in the 90s, she'd gotten thin, but I remember looking back at old pictures of her from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and these pictures show a woman deep in the trenches of obesity. Yep, a type 2 diabetic, lover of Sam's Club snack hauls, a kitchen high in sodium and low in fiber and complex carbs. And the contradiction was baffling, as I'm sure you can imagine. She wanted me thin, but she made sure I had every tool to remain fat, and she did everything she could to encourage me to lose weight, except provide the material or emotional conditions that would increase the likelihood of that ever happening. My mother. Besides my grandmother, I would say that the most consistent and enduring examples of fat shaming came from her. Now, after my grandma died my freshman year of college, my mother picked up the baton and dutifully continued the campaign. By that point, criticizing my body was a long-standing, time-honored family tradition. So let's recap. My fat became a family problem when I was around 8. And I would have thought that such a crushing loss would distract and perhaps even disrupt the weight surveillance that had been a hallmark of my early years, but sadly this was not to be so. In fact, it seems she carried on, and by she, I mean my mother, she carried on with renewed vigor. And here's the thing. My mom was also fat, okay? This is wild. And let me say, she was a great mother, a great parent in most ways. There's plenty that I learned from her that I have passed down and I want to pass down to my own daughter. But this part, absolutely fucking not. My mom was also fat. To a random passerby, she was just a plain old fat woman. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but she just kind of was a run-of-the-mill looking fat person. But knowing what I know now, she was absolutely obese. So at the time, her behavior was unscrutable. Like, why won't this lady who is also fat keep her foot off my neck? I just cannot imagine. I mean, times have changed so much, and the standards of what's appropriate and not appropriate have so evolved that I just can't imagine carrying out some of this behavior that my own mother carried out towards me. For example, I remember going to the doctor's office with her in middle school, and I think I was in like 7th or 8th grade, and you have to get on the scale. And I remember when I was getting on the scale, my mother gave an audible start. She was like, oh, when the scale reviewed my weight of 180 pounds, okay? Which I realize, depending on your height, I probably haven't really gotten much taller since then, so I was probably like 5'3". Yes, that is overweight. It might even be obese, but like, there was a time when I would have like gone on to Survivor in hopes of getting back down to 180 pounds. So anyway, I can imagine few things more damaging to a teen girl's self-esteem, her psyche, her self-image than what happened at that doctor's office. In another example, I remember jumping to college now. We went on a tour of my, the college that I would eventually attend. And she asked me, she observed that I had stretch marks on my arms. And she asked me, she was like, why do you have stretch marks on your arms? And I think at the time I just shrugged. But now I'm like, what kind of question is that? Like, why does anybody have anything about them? Like, why? Because it wasn't a genuine question. It was a bad faith question. It was really, why are you so fat as to have stretch marks on your arms? That was the question. And that's always stuck out to me. I also remember, and this is pretty painful in my memory, but I remember her. So I had these, do y'all remember, I say y'all as if anyone is listening, but Old Navy used to make these like very colorful skinny jeans. I remember they used to make the Rockstar skinny jeans that I think they still make, but back then they had these ones that were very stretchy and they were in all different colors, and I had a pair that was red. And I remember being in my mom's room. I don't know if I had gotten dressed to go somewhere or what was happening, but she remarked that she could see the cellulite through my pants. And that made me cry. And I remember her asking, like, not asking, but expressing like bewilderment about my tears. And my sister, who we'll get to her, but she was like, of course she's crying. Like, that was really mean, which was rare because my sister, more on her later. But the point is, like, if she's coming to my defense like that, you know, she was not a person who would ever be the voice of reason, especially in favor of kindness or care. The reason I'm bringing up all of these kind of fatphobic slights against me is to illustrate the fact that I couldn't understand why, as a fat woman herself, she was so fault-finding when it came to my weight. Like, shouldn't it have been her job to shield me from weight-based criticism rather than perpetuate it herself? This is my thought process, or this was my thought process back then. If my grandma got on me about my weight, I was certain that she must have policed my mom's weight just as stringently. The fact that my mom remained fat for her entire life, except for a short stint in Weight Watchers before I was born, it's a testament to the idea, or to me, it should have been to her. She should have realized, I cannot lecture someone, nag, harangue, cajole, bother anyone into losing weight. It didn't work for me, so why would it work for anyone else? And fucking yet, she carried on the hurtful tradition of fat phobia. It did fuck all to help me lose weight. If you have that knowledge and you've been down this road before, then why do it? So standing there, sniffling in my too tight red skinny jeans from Old Navy that you could see the cellulite through, I challenged her for the first time. I said, so when grandma got on you about your weight, did it help you? And she didn't answer me. And I repeated myself, did it help you? And she said no. And then I said, well, then why do you do it to me? And she had no answer. And this is a moment that I consider both vindicating and baffling. I felt vindicated because finally, after years of unchecked weight-based criticism against me, she was finally made to answer for her crimes, and she couldn't justify those actions because what was she gonna say? I was just fucking right. There was nothing that she could have said that would have made it make sense. But it's also baffling because why would you then spend years rolling merrily down a path that you knew would be futile because it was futile for you? When I reflect on that moment as an adult, it's still upsetting, but it's not as puzzling. And this is why. On the surface, it's absolute nonsense. I mean, fat daughter relentlessly harassed about her weight by obese mother. That's absurd. However, as an adult, I can contextualize it in a way that I couldn't back then. Number one, this was well before social media would introduce us to the concept of body positivity. It was an unforgiving time to be fat. There was not this widespread idea that we all know now that all bodies are good. There was no fat liberation or even body neutrality. Back then, to be fat was to be objectively bad, and that was a cultural soup in which we were all stewing and brewing. As a result of that, there was no real counter to anti-fat bias. If you were fat, your only option was to attempt to become thin. Even if you never got there, you had to at least appear to be trying. It was expected that you were on a diet or would be starting one tomorrow. And so naturally, my mother internalized that, as did most fat people at the time, including myself. Having been raised as the fat child of my grandmother, I'm sure it was no fun time for her. So she was a fat child and woman, I mean, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and those weren't great times for fat people whatsoever. She probably was not having a good time as a fat person because it just wasn't a thing to accept yourself as you were, or to be neutral about your body, or to be positive about how you looked or not want to lose weight. That just wasn't a thing. That did not exist. That was not a part of our public consciousness. Body image issues, the fraught relationship with food and the scale, the negative self-talk about her own body. She got all of that from her mother. And then she simply passed all of that right on to me. And I don't think it could have gone any other way. So that's why, despite the fact that she planted the seeds for some of the most just toxic mindset that I have battled my entire life as far as weight and appearance, I don't think it had to be like that. That is how it had to go. She did not have the tools to be any other way. And so I can kind of have a little bit of grace for her there. But she was definitely desperate not to be fat, but she never developed the tools and skills to escape it. And in the style of my grandmother, bringing home family-sized bags of Ruffles from Sam's Club, my mother was extremely critical of my weight, and yet fast food and frozen pizzas were a weekly staple of our diets. She spent her entire life wanting to lose weight and never could quite get it right. She never managed to establish or maintain those necessary life changes. I imagine that she promised herself that her children would never struggle with weight the way she did, and she would make sure of it. So I can also then imagine the mounting terror that she might have felt when I began to fat up. She had to stop it. Something had to be done immediately. But because she never developed those tools and habits, she had only one tool at her disposal. At her disposal. And that was criticism. I continued to be a relatively fat child, then a fatter teen, and then a very less fat teen for a short amount of time, but that's a story for another video. And finally, to an even fatter young adult. I was pretty fat. I'll let you you can have that image. But one thing stands out as a constant during the fat years, and it is the toll that my family's toxic culture around weight took on the relationship I had with the other members of my family. And I think that my relationship with my sister never recovered from those toxic, fat-phobic seeds that were planted early on. Having been identified as the fat one in my family made my weight a fair point of discussion for almost anybody else in the family at the time. And since the ringleaders, my mother and grandmother, never tired of that exciting topic, why should anyone else miss out on the fun? They may not have realized that their public scrutiny, I mean, it wasn't public, but, prolific, scrutiny of my weight made it okay for me to be treated a certain way by others in the family. Probably the most prominent example of this, definitely the most prominent example of this is me and my sister. So she and I are quite close in age. We're not even 2 years apart, 2 full years apart. And as such, we grew up close, but we didn't get along. We've always had and continue to have a very fraught relationship. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the dynamic of our friendship, our relationship, began to shift right around the time that I was identified as the fat sister. Oh, that's right. And you can probably imagine, I know there's a lot of people out there who they are the fat one of the family, they're the fat sister, and let me tell you something, it's brutal. It's brutal. I regard my younger sister, and she is my younger sister, as my first and most ardent bully. She was a bitch. We argued often, as siblings do, but the only arguments I've ever had to come to blows were with her. I was passive aggressive. Like, I'm not gonna outright, or at least not then, I'm not going to outright say anything to your face, but I would do little sneaky stuff. So I'm not saying that I was perfect in any way. She was outright verbally abusive. And I mean that. Like, I think a case could be made for my grandmother having been at least, her intentions were good. She loved me. She cared. Not so with my sister. This is a different story. We're in different territory now. She was abusive. She was verbally abusive. And over the years, she developed quite the arsenal of cutting quips, barbs, and jabs, encompassing a range of available topics. And as we brawled our way into our teenage years, imagine that at some point she thought to herself, why beat around the bush when there's one thing that will always hit with precision and accuracy? Because she could always just call me fat. And because she knew that my weight was a point of sensitivity for me, she developed a weird fixation with fatness and with my fatness, and by extension, my body. She surveilled me. I mean, there was no one in my family more obsessed with the way I looked than her. And I would say that in some way continues to this day. Although my weight had become a family problem for many years by that point, my sister was just starting to limber up in this regard. And she used to call me body conscious. More it seemed as an observation than an insult, but I'm like, fuck yes, I was body conscious. How could I not be in this weird, toxic family? My sister was overweight by every metric herself, but because she was the thin one, and because she's a bitch, she felt it was her duty to remind me of my fatness at every turn. It became a cause that she took up with great dedication and fervor. The more she knew it hurt my feelings, the more she carried on with it. So by this time, she'd been steeped in years worth of fat phobia aimed at me specifically, and there was years worth of, I guess, implicit pre-approval that told her it was an okay thing for her to do to also focus on my weight and my body. Again, I wasn't like a sitting duck in all of this. I wasn't innocent. We have different styles of combat. Mine was not to argue or insult her. It was other things. But I didn't get any satisfaction from just like calling her names. But it was very much a back and forth. I would say that she was the most brutal, and I think the rest of my family agreed. And I know that because of things that were said then, but also the fact that she doesn't have a good relationship with anybody in our family today. There was nothing that would cause more harm to her than she could cause to me than when she called me fat or something like it. She was big-ish, but I was bigger. And there's the key distinction, because she was regarded as the skinny sister. And that was a position that she relished within our family. At times, my mom or my grandparents would mete out like a flimsy admonition of her body as her weight fluctuated in her teen years, but I remained the fattest, and therefore, I was kind of like a tourniquet through which the deluge of fat phobia would be like staunched or reduced to a trickle before it got to anybody else in the family. And so we went on like this for more years, locked into bitter combat and competition. And I'm not competitive by any means. But weight and size were the one area of life where I wanted nothing more than to defeat her. And it is this contentious dynamic that would characterize her and I's relationship for many years to come. Before I continue, I need to make a quick aside to put into context the type of person that my sister is from my view, of course. I know that other people have a different experience with her and a different view of her, but to me, she is a very difficult person. It's a part of our family lore that she was a fussy baby who developed into an irritable toddler who became a crotchety child. And what I mean is that she's never had any amount of chill. I do not believe she's had even one moment's peace since she was in utero. Everything bothered her. She lived in a state of irritation and annoyance, and she was just never ever a pleasant person in general, and that has continued to today. And the reason that I mention that is because although I am discussing my experiences as the fat one in my family when it comes to my sister, I don't think we would have had a positive or productive relationship regardless, because she said horrific things to me over the years, many of these kind of unprovoked. I'm sure she would not say that they were unprovoked. She's told me like to delete myself. She's called me the R slur and many more, and some of which I'm going to talk about here. But my fatness, me being the biggest, was simply the most convenient point of ridicule for her. I think she was just angry, and I know this, she's told me. And me being fat was just, an easy way for her to express that. Had it not been that, I have plenty of evidence to suggest that it would have been something else due to the fact that our personalities are fundamentally incompatible. Nevertheless, my lasting impression of her is that she was the first person to bully me as a result of my weight. And it's hard for me to remember specific things that were said because this was a long time ago now, and there are so many small and large jabs and insults that all kind of mix together in a slurry of assorted put-downs. And also, I'll be honest, none of her insults were groundbreaking or especially creative, so there's nothing new or fresh in that regard. But I'll point out two honorable mentions or things that stand out in my memory as far as her. And the first one isn't really a big deal, but it is indicative of the brand and flavor of the kind of shit she would say during our teen years. We used to be on this church dance team. I grew up evangelical Christian. Yes, that is a weird added layer to this story. And I realize this seems random to mention, but I promise it'll connect. I've always had large hips. Large hips and a very significant hip to waist ratio. Presently, it's one of my favorite physical attributes. But back then, I wanted them surgically removed. Because no 14-year-old girl wants to sit down at lunch in the cafeteria only be told by some little boy that she has childbearing hips. I wanted to die. Anyway, it does remain one of my most notable characteristics. I remember when I was younger, I used to try to like walk with my hands or my arms by my sides as to obscure the view of my hips because I just hated it. I hated it. But so one day we were at practice and one of the other people on the team affectionately referred to me as Miss Hips, and I wanted to perish. Even back then, I knew she didn't mean it to be rude or disparaging because she was just a nice person. She'd always been kind to me. I had no reason to really believe that she decided one day that she wanted to like take me down a peg or two. Unfortunately, my sister heard her say this, and she did not waste any time using it to her advantage like that day. Maybe even before we left practice, she was calling me Miss Hips with a smirk and a tone of voice heavy with condescension and smuggery. Is that even a word? I'm not sure why this thing she said, as opposed to countless other examples, stand out to me as it does. I mean, obviously it's a rude and shitty thing to say, especially the way that she meant it. And I can't remember what I had done or what I said to provoke it. But what makes Miss Hips uniquely shitty was that she knew that my weight and overall presentation of my body was a sore issue. And that's why she said it. You know, remember, she clocked me as being body conscious, so she knew that this would be something that would bother me. She knew that my hips were a point of sensitivity for me, and that's why she did it. That's why. And she also knew that there would be nothing I could say in return. There was no retort that I could offer that would cut as precisely as did Miss Hips. Okay, so that's why she said that. And I think the reason I wanted to bring that up was because to me it illustrates the kind of person that I was dealing with. The next noteworthy example is significantly more disturbing, and I would say that this is one of the put downs that hurt me the most back then, but really didn't age well because it made her seem totally unhinged in hindsight. And it's a remark that she can't easily go back and try to defend or justify. I can't remember for the life of me the context in which this was said. I can only remember the general era of time, and I think we were in early adulthood. I want to say like early 20s. I think we were at home having like one of our run-of-the-mill arguments. Maybe it got a little more heated than usual. But I also remember that she had this boyfriend at the time, and let's just call him Dean. She, of course, believed that I was jealous that she had a boyfriend. I really don't remember. I just think I just didn't like her at all, so I didn't care. I'm like, gosh, this cannot be a quality man if he's with her. So I don't think I cared. And so we were arguing already, I think. And then she said, No one wants that. No one's gonna fuck that. That's all I remember. That is all I remember, but I think that's enough. But there are some things that you just can't come back from. And at the time, I feel like I was very hurt at the time. Hurt, but also jarred. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you go here? Why would you say? Anyway, let me continue. I think I was hurt, but more surprised. And I don't remember like dwelling on it. But even for her, that was a lot. But I've never forgotten it. Not only because she'd never said anything like that before, but because it's fucking weird. I mentioned that comment didn't age well. And whenever we argue, one of our favorite things to do is reach back into the past and dust off old grievances. And whenever I bring it up, which is not often, I don't want to bring it up too much. I need it to retain its power. I need it to retain maximum impact. But whenever I bring it up, she kind of dissolves into a puddle of excuses and blame shifting. But these are obvious distractions meant to keep her from having to sit with the fact that there was once a time where she was actively thinking about someone fucking or not fucking her sister. Like, yes, it's a very cruel insult, but baked into that is the implicit admission that you were thinking about your sister fucking. Like, oh, why would she say that out loud? Look, I have not once ever considered anyone in my family having sex. Like, that's nasty. As far as I'm concerned, my niece was dropped off by the stork. She was purchased at the grocery store. She was fished out of one of them claw machines. I don't even like to go there. So the fact that not only she would think that, but then go on to say it out loud is bonkers. So as you can clearly see, we have always had a toxic relationship. And while the fat phobia poured gasoline on it, I don't think we would have been close even in a neutral environment because we're fundamentally incompatible people. But even still, I do wonder what our childhood might have looked like if my weight had not been the easiest vessel for her cruelty and had that not been propped up by the family dynamic. Like, there are families that do contain fat people where they don't do this stuff to each other, where it's not okay, where there isn't this culture of weight criticism and scrutiny. So I know it's possible. Both me and my sister are obviously adults now, and our relationship has changed, though I don't think it's necessarily improved. And I think it's fair to say that in my teen years, my sister, as the skinny one, always felt like she had the upper hand. I can remember wishing a lot not to be thin or skinny, but I just wanted to be thinner than her. She wore it as such a badge of honor that I just wanted to snatch it right off. But over time, our relationship has only continued to sour. Womp womp, spoiler alert, it's not gotten any better. So it's remained the same pretty much, except with one important distinction. And that is that she is now the fat one. Very fat. And I am thin. That's right. So now that I am the thin one, okay, my apologies, I'm trying to keep the glee out of my voice here. But now that I am the thin one, the dynamics of our relationship have shifted. The schoolyard taunting has kind of simmered down. You know, we don't do that anymore. But sometimes she does still like to throw those, like, old style taunts and jabs. Except now I've taken her most lethal and convenient weapon. She doesn't have the low-hanging fruit of my weight when she wants to knock me down a peg or two. Our relationship will probably always be marked by strife and toxicity, but I don't believe those early days of unchecked fat phobia robbed us of a would-be close, like, sisterly bond. No, and I'm okay with that. I've come to peace and come to terms with the fact that, you know what, not all siblings are close. I don't think she's a good person, or she's got her own issues, but, and I don't want to, tell her story here, but it's fine. However, I do kind of wonder what our formative years might have looked like had she not had my weight as a handy vessel through which to indulge in the shittiest parts of her personality and temperament. When I look back now, I can see how much of my early life was shaped by other people's fear, shame, and unresolved issues about their own bodies. And so much of the criticism aimed at me, like by my mother and grandmother at least, really didn't have much to do with me at all. I mean, it did, but it didn't. I think I was simply the most convenient target in a family that didn't know any other way to deal with its anxieties around weight. Nothing they did ever worked. When I lost weight, it had nothing to do with them at all. It was many years later. They were not a part of it. It had nothing to do with them. And I remember my sister even saying, like, why didn't you do it sooner? We were all trying to tell you. Fuck off, because that's not how that shit works. I learned what kind of parent that I refuse to be, and the way that I will navigate my relationship with my daughter in this regard. I learned what kind of environment I want to create and what generational patterns will stop with me.